continue with sociology. We're going to the strengths and limitations of different quantitative research. I want to talk about quantitative research. We have questionnaires, we have structured interviews, we have structured interview is part of questionnaire, but it's structured because the researcher is there with you, is present with you, with the respondent. Then we have experiment and content analysis. So we're going to start with questionnaires anyway. For questionnaires, questionnaire consists of written questions that take one of two forms. So we have the poster questionnaire and the researcher administered questionnaire, which is the structured interview. So we start with the poster questionnaire. For poster questionnaire, these are normally completed in private without the researcher being present. Today, these include web-based or email questions. So for poster questionnaire, sometimes you make a call, you receive, as soon as you finish your calls, there are questions about very good, average, and these are questionnaires. These are web-based or emailed questionnaires. So one way or the other, it simply means that you answer those questions in private without the respondent, without the researcher being present. That is a poster questionnaire, and it can be sent to you through posts.
Can be answered also, like you can be anywhere
online.
Answered,
yeah. Then we have the structured interview. For structured interview, the roles. Researcher administered questionnaires are completed in the presence of the researcher, with respondents answering questions verbally. These are structured interview. So we call it structured interview because the researcher provides you with a standardized question, which you have to answer verbally. The researcher is there, and you as the respondent, you are also available. That is structured interview. I think it's clear. So for poster questionnaires, they said questionnaires involve two basic types of questions: closed-ended or closed-ended questions, which we have closed-ended and open-ended questions. For closed-ended question, we call it pre-coded questions. Here, the researcher provides you with answers, gives you options to choose from. That is what we call closed-ended question. And for the other one, I think you get the point about closed-ended here. So the researcher limits the response that can be given anyway. So for closed-ended question, the researcher allows you, it gives you options which you can choose from. That limits the number of responses you can give because it is A, B, C, D. You can't give outside A, B, C, D. That's what they meant by researcher limiting the response of the respondent. So there are variations on this type of question, such as those that measures respondent's attitude, but their defining characteristics is that they do not allow the respondent to develop an answer beyond the listed categories. Yeah, there might be abstracts, which talks about qualitative, but you won't still go beyond the options provided for you. That is why it is closed-ended. Then we have the open-ended question. The researcher does not provide possible answers, rather the respondent answers in their own words. It is open-ended because the researcher allows you to give answers based on your opinion or your understanding. That is open-ended question. Then they make the example here. For example, what do you like about studying sociology? It's an open-ended question. So you have your opinion, I have my opinion. That's an open-ended question. I think it's clear. Then this type of questions find out more about the respondent's opinion and produces a limited form of qualitative data. Although the main aim of the questionnaire is usually to quantify responses, many questionnaires contain a mix of open and closed questions. For questionnaires, what we need from questionnaires are to know how many people says yes, how many people say no. So what we really needed is the quantitative aspect of it. Though it might look qualitative, but for the fact that what we need to point out or what we need to figure out, it's all about how many respondents do we have, how many of them say yes, how many of them say no, or what are the opinions, how many give the same opinion or not. So that is about questionnaire. So what is the strength of questionnaires? For closed-ended questions, which are the same as pre-coded questions, it makes it easier to quantify data because the options are already known. They are limited in number and easy to count. Such questions are also quick and easy to code. This can be just a simple count of the numbers of responses. So the first advantage or strength or benefit of closed-ended questions or pre-coded questions is that they are easy to quantify because the options are there. We already have the options. So it's either we have 7 people choosing A, or 8 people choosing B, or 6 people choosing D. So it's easy for us to quantify because of the limited numbers they have. So we can easily count based on the fact that there are options. And now, pre-coded questions are useful for when the researcher needs to contact large numbers of people quickly and efficiently. So another advantage about pre-coded questionnaire or closed-ended questionnaire questions are they are easy to put together, and especially when the researcher needs to get a quick response from large numbers of people. So it's about ABC, so we can easily find out who and who. So it's easy to put together, and it is quicker. The respondents the respondents do the time-consuming work of completing the questionnaire. So because it could be a poster, so whoever responds do it at its own time. So it's not going to be the researcher's time.
Yeah.
Do you get it? So the researcher has the freedom to use his time for whatever research it needs to continue to deal with. But the time to answer those questionnaires are the time of the respondents, and that's an advantage because it allows you to do other things instead of waiting for the response. Questionnaires can result in highly reliable data because everyone answers the same questions. It is easy to replicate the research. It is highly reliable because you can replicate it, you can do it again, you can repeat it again because based on the fact that the options are almost going to be the same. So if ABCD is available to you, ABCD is available to me, to everyone. So it's highly reliable. The fact that respondents often remain anonymous means that the validity of the research is improved, especially when it involves questions that might be seen as personal. It's a questionnaire, which means you can remain anonymous. So nobody knows your identity. As a result of that, you might be giving a valid response. And that means it's highly valid. You're not going to be subjective because nobody knows whatever you say. There's also the less risk that the respondent will give biased answers to try to anticipate what the researcher wants to hear. Because the researcher is not present. So it means you're not going to be under influence or pressure by the researcher to give answers that you don't want to give. So these are the strengths or the benefits of pre-coded questions. One, they are easy to quantify. Two, they are quicker to put together and they are efficient. Three, they are highly reliable. And four, they have high validity.
Yes.
Then we'll go to the limitations of questionnaires. One significant practical problem with questionnaires is a low response rate, where only a small number of those receiving the questionnaire return it. So the first problem about questionnaire is that I might receive the questionnaire and just drop it somewhere. I won't return it. So not returning it is a problem because it reduces the number of response you get as researcher. But you need much response. That's why you gave it out in the first place. This can result in a carefully designed sample becoming unrepresentative because large numbers of people are not returning. So it doesn't give you the opportunity to generalize. You get the point there? The third one, because if it is unrepresentative, it means you cannot generalize. Or responding correctly. Then another problem is giving a wrong response, and which you have to use, then you're not getting the right answer. Such as choosing two answers when only one was requested. So you have A, B, C, D. You're supposed to choose A. You choose A and B. That gives a wrong choice of answer. That gives a wrong response. The questionnaire format makes it difficult to examine complex issues and opinions. Another weakness is the fact that the researcher has to decide at the start of the study what is and is not significant. There's no opportunity to change this later on. So, another problem is about the complexity because you cannot easily know what the opinion was of that respondent and why he or she has chosen that point or why he or she has chosen that option. You wouldn't know because you're not there. And there's no, facial expression that would at least give you that opportunity to figure out the mindset of the respondent. That's the first thing. That's another one. Then another weakness is the fact that the researcher has to decide. So whatever questions you are asking, you have to ask it at the beginning. As soon as the questionnaire is being drafted, you won't be able to change it. So that means whatever comes to your mind afterwards cannot go on with that. It will not be part of the response you get. Is it clear? So those are the problems about questionnaire. One, the response rate might be low. Because some people might just ignore it.
Not answer it.
Two, it is the respondents might give a wrong answer, which does not really reflect why you are giving it. Give wrong answers, probably choosing two options instead of just one. And the opinion of people, you cannot really figure out or find out why they have chosen what option they choose. And the last one is about researcher itself, the researcher might not be able to include more questions if there's opportunity to include more because the questions are already sent to a person. Is it clear? So that's about questionnaire, the strength and the limitation. Any question about that? So our questionnaire is reliable, unreliable, or we don't know. So we check. The researcher has no way of knowing whether his respondent has understood the question properly. So the researcher also has to trust. The researcher also has to trust. Sorry, please. I'll be right back. So our questionnaire is reliable, unreliable, don't know. So the point is, because they are questionnaires and the researcher doesn't have the opportunity to know who sent or who responded to those questions. So it's difficult to understand, but let's read it anyway. The researcher has no way of knowing whether a respondent has understood the question properly. The researcher also has, the first thing is, the researcher doesn't know if, there's no way the researcher would know if the questionnaire has been answered correctly. Because it's not going to be there, or she's not going to be there when you are answering the questions. Because it's private. The researcher also has to trust that the question means the same thing to all respondents. So the interpretation of the question, that is the point.
The way it's asked.
Yeah, no, it's not the way it is asked. The way you interpret it. It's a questionnaire. So how reliable the questionnaire is or unreliable, we don't know. Why don't we know as researchers? We don't know because we're not always going to be there when the questions are being answered.
Yes.
So it means the questions are answered privately. So we're not there. Not structured interview that you're there to provide options like open-ended or closed-ended. But here you're not there. So whoever answers the question, you don't even know. So the first problem about how reliable or unreliable a questionnaire is that we don't understand, the researcher would not know if the questions were answered properly. Now the second one, the researcher also has to trust that the questions mean the same thing to all respondents. So that is where the interpretation of the question goes in. So what's your own interpretation of the question? What's your own narrative of the question? What about if your own interpretation is different from mine? Then it means we're not going to have the same answers. So we have to trust that all respondents understand and have the same idea about the context, about the content, like about the bone of contention. So it means your understanding of A is the same as my understanding of A, is the same as your understanding of A to everyone. So then it can be reliable. While remaining unknown, that's with anonymity, it may encourage honesty, yes. It might be reliable because it is an anonymous response. If someone other than the intended respondent completes the questionnaire, then there will be a problem about validity. So, the questionnaire is intended to be responded by a certain individual. So if the researcher has given you the questionnaire, he or she has given it to you because if he or she felt that you are in the right position to answer the puzzles, but you might give it to someone else. So giving it to someone else means it will lack validity because you are not, the third party you gave it to was not intended to have it. It was not in the intention of the researcher to give it to that individual you gave it to. So that lacks the validity. Then it cannot represent. Do you understand? Some of these problems can be avoided by pilot studies, but they cannot be totally removed anyway. So a further problem involves unintentional biased questions. This can take a number of forms. One, if a question has more than one meaning, people will be answering different questions. So you have to ensure that the meaning
is the same.
The meaning you give, whatever you've written, has the same meaning. If not, then you're going to have different answers. Leading questions suggest a required answer. For example, why do you think it is important to study sociology? It doesn't allow respondent to question whether it is important. So because you say, why do you think it's important? Saying, why do you think it's important means you only want the respondent to talk about the importance. So you did not allow the respondent to say his mind or her mind about sociology and the importance of sociology, or maybe it's not even important to him.
Because you have to, because it's in the
So here it's a leading question.
Yeah.
You've provided the respondent with a leading question. And one of the problems of questionnaire, a good questionnaire, is lack of not providing leading questions. Because when you provide leading questions, they already know what the answer you have. They already
You know
know
what
the
to
kind of
expect.
answers you want,
Yeah.
so they're gonna give it to you.
I mean, they're all going to say it's important.
Do you understand? No, they're not going to say it's important. The only thing they have to do now is to talk about the importance of sociology. You didn't allow them to come up with their own idea or knowledge. Because you said, the question is, why do you think it is important to study sociology?
Yeah, no, they say, why do you think it's important? So you have to write it's important, because you cannot write it's not because they told you.
Yeah, that is what we call a leading questions.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow a respondent to
Think otherwise.
otherwise. So, and that might become unreliable. It might bring about bias.
Yes.
Because now you want me to say, I have to talk about the importance of sociology. Meanwhile, I don't see it as important.
No, I can, yeah.
Do you get it? So that means you'll be biased, you'll be subjective, based on the fact that the question has influenced your decision. So there's bias when the question influences your decision.
Yes.
Is it clear? That is subjective. If an option is not precisely defined, it will mean different things to different people. For example, people may define the word occasionally or often in different ways. So, whatever option you give, it has to give the same meaning. If not, then if it gives different meaning, it means it will bring about different answers. So whatever options you give to respondents, those options should have the same, they should have meanings that do not make them the same. And whatever it is, respondents must be able, all respondents must have the same idea, like mentality about what the questions are. If not, then you should be expecting different answers from them. So these are what brings about reliability or unreliability of a questionnaire. Who answers the question, your understanding about the question, the narration of the question. These are things you need to talk about. Do you understand? Any question about it? So that ends questionnaire. So we're going to structured interviews now. Are you there? Structured interviews. A structured interview is where the researcher asks questions to respondents in person to achieve consistent and comparable results. The same questions are asked in the same order each time. There's no flexibility to change the order of the questions. So we call it a structured interview because it provides a standardized question where the researcher would ask the same question from all the respondents. So whoever is the respondent, the question would not be intertwined. It will be the same all through. So that is a structured interview. Do you get structured interview?
Yes.
So what are the strengths of structured interview? Number one, potential reliability problems, such as respondent misunderstanding or not answering questions, can be fixed by the researcher. Because the researcher is present, it means whatever you don't understand about the question, or if the researcher understands that or finds out that you are misinterpreting the question, then he or she can put you through. So it means not understanding the question is out of the way. So the problem of misunderstanding or not answering the question is done because the researcher is already there to shed more light on it. In addition, the structured interview avoids the problem of unrepresentative samples. The response rates will be 100%. Yeah, you cannot talk about unrepresentative here because the researcher is present where the respondents are. So if I'm intending to give you the questionnaire, you won't be able to give it to someone else because I'm present. So I'm there, I'm with you. It becomes difficult for you to give it to someone else. Except if I permit you to do that. If not, then you cannot. Is it clear? Then what are the problems about structured interview? Structured interviews involve assumptions, prejudgment about people's behavior and like questionnaires can also contain biased questions, which are not on purpose. The lack of anonymity in an interview also contributes to two related limitations. So, for structural interviews, it's all about assumption. So, which means we might be assuming, we might be able to get information that is biased or answers that are biased based on the fact that it's about opinions of people and their behavior at any point in time. So, now, what brings about a problem of two structured interview? One, the interview effect occurs when the respondent tries to help the researcher by providing answers designed to please. Designed to please. This reduces validity because respondents simply provide answers they think the researcher wants to, or which will make a good impression. So, the first problem about, or the first limitation about structured interview is that researchers might come up with helping you. We call it interview effect. So if the researcher comes up helping you, it means you'll be providing answers that pleases the researcher. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So that brings about bias, which will lead to lack of validity. So then you are influenced based on the attitude of the researcher towards you. So you wouldn't want to say no to certain things because the researcher will not be happy you saying no. The researcher effect is when the relationship between researcher and respondent may be biased, with biased responses. Reason first, aggressive interviewers, for example, may introduce bias by forcing respondent into giving answers that they do not really believe. So, the researcher effect also comes in here, where you have to, because of the researcher, you won't be able to give the right answer. Maybe the researcher is an aggressive person and you don't want him or her to get angry.
So you just say what they want?
Just say what you think will suit him or her. You move on. 2. Status considerations based on factors such as age, gender, class, and ethnicity. They may also bias the data. So, status consideration is also another problem about structured interview. Relationships you have with people. When you have a relationship with someone you are interviewing, there will be cordiality. And that affects the validity of the questionnaire. Gender too. Oh, boys to boys and
women to
women. Yeah. This will also affect the validity. Class within the society. Different people have different classes in the society. That means the researcher might give specific treatment to someone in the ruling class or to the upper class than someone in the working class, and they have the same questions to answer. But the kind of environment and the kind of questions you answer,
the way they say is different.
Yeah, it's different. So that's about researcher effect. Is researcher effect clear?
Yes.
So the next one is experiments. For experiments, which is another quantitative research, it involves testing the relationship between different variables. When we talk about different variables, it will bring about causation and correlation. But let's go further. Things that can change under controlled conditions. That's why we call them variables. We call them variables because they are bound to change. They have the flexibility to change over time. So the researcher changes independent variables to see whether they produce a change in the independent variable. The researcher changes independent variables to see whether they produce a change in the independent variables that are not changed by the researcher. Any changes must be caused by a change in the independent variable. So, for researcher, they try to find out the correlation between events or situations or the causation of events or situations. So that is why we talk about the experiments. So we start with correlation. So the experiments therefore are based on changing an independent variable and measuring any later change in a dependent variable. So you need an independent variable with a dependent variable. A dependent variable is a variable that needs to rely on others to stay or to be relevant. But independent, it means it can stay on its own. So here this relationship can be one or two types. So we have correlations and causation. For correlation, it simply talks about two things that happen by coincidence, and they happen at the same time, maybe through coincidence, but they happen. So the event of one makes another one to happen. That is correlation. So let's read anyway. For correlation, this occurs when two or more things happen at roughly the same time. This only suggests the relationship, however, because it is possible for them to occur by chance. So it might be coincidence but in as much as they happen at the same time, it is a correlation. Then we have causation, which involves the idea that when one action occurs, another always follows. Correlation is not the same as causation. Causation means as soon as this happens, the next thing will happen. That is causation. But for correlation, it's simply talking about two events that are not the same and they're happening at the same time. So for causation, for example of correlation, we're going to say anyway, it is not always easy to distinguish between correlation and causation in the real world of sociological research because things often happen at the same time by chance or coincidence. However, there are two ways to separate correlation from causality or causation. Test and retest a relationship. So the more time a test is replicated with the same result, the greater the chance that the relationship is causal. So correlation and causation in real sense is difficult to separate because we said correlation is two things happening at the same time and causation means one happens after another. So the time in between them is not a time that we can determine. So they might happen by chance, but we wouldn't know. So one way to know if it is correlation or causation is through test and retest relationship. So for test and retest a relationship, it means if this thing happens now, something else happens. So for every time this happens, does this also happen with it? So if it continues to happen continuously at the same state, then we can call it causation. So it means for every time A occurs, B will be behind it. That is causation. Do you understand? So we test it more often and often, and if we continue to get the same result, then we could call it causation. They use different groups with exactly the same characteristics. An experimental group whose behavior is manipulated or a control group whose behavior is not manipulated. So another way to test causation or correlation is through
Different
groups. And for different groups, there are groups that you can influence their behavior and some groups that you cannot influence their behavior. So with this, you'll be able to know which one is causation, which one is correlation. So then we have, is it clear or not, please?
Yes.
Okay. Then we have laboratory experiments. Laboratory experiments take place in a closed environment where conditions can be precisely monitored and controlled. This ensures that no outside or controlled variables affect the relationship between the dependent and independent variables. This kind of experiments are unusual in sociology because they involve an artificial created situation, and so it is unlikely that the findings will apply to the real world. Participants are the same as respondents, will be aware that research is taking place and this will affect how they behave. Laboratory experiments also raise ethical issues about permission, which is consent. For laboratory experiments, it is done in a closed situation, and there's no way we want to experiment in a closed situation which those involved will not be involved. Those involved will not know. The participants, they will be involved. They will know about it. So it means because they know about, because they understand your presence, it means their behavior might not be the real behavior. You won't be able to get a natural result from an artificial environment. That is about laboratory. Laboratory is an artificial environment and it does not allow you to get a natural result.
Okay.
I think it's clear that way. Okay. So we have field experiments. For field experiments, they are more appropriate for sociological research because they are not conducted in a closed, controlled environment. They are not done in an artificial environment.
Not limited, right?
Yeah, they're not limited. Let's use not in artificial environment. The environment is not constructed. It's not constructed. So it is very difficult to control all possible independent variables in the natural. It's natural, right? In the natural setting, which means that natural experiment tends to establish correlations rather than causation. However, the basic principles of the experiments are the same. Researchers use dependent and independent variables to test a hypothesis or answer a research question. So to test the hypothesis, the teacher's expectations influence how well their students do in school. Rosendale and Jacobson in 1968 conducted a study of low educational achievement in children. The dependent variable was their level of achievement, and the independent variable was the expectation that the teacher had about the ability of their students. So we are using two variables here. The dependent variable, which is based on the achievement of the student itself, and the independent variance, which is based on the expectation of the teachers. So there are two variables here that we want to check if they're going to give us causation or correlation. So for Rosenthal and Jacobson, they manipulated the independent variable by pretending to be psychologists who could, on the basis of sophisticated IQ tests, identify children who would display dramatic intellectual growth. So here they manipulated the independent variable. So instead of them to act as a teacher, they're acting like a psychologist who is trying to see how students' IQ are, how they display their IQ. They are teachers, but instead of them to showcase themselves or identify themselves as teachers, they manipulated the situation by identifying themselves as psychologists. Do you get the point here? Okay. So, in fact, they tested the students and then randomly classed some students as later developers. So the researchers informed the teachers of their findings. They retested the students at a later date and discovered that the IQ scores of those whose teachers believed were late developing high flyers are significantly improved. So here, the result is gotten, but it's been manipulated. Because if they have acted as a teacher, the students might not have tried to come up with the effort they put into it. But here is the test of your IQ. Nobody wants to get a low IQ. Do you understand? So as a result of that, they put much effort.
Yes.
Because they felt, oh, these people wants to know how well our mental is. Do you understand? So the situation has been manipulated. So what are the strengths of field experiments? Laboratory experiments are easier to replicate than field experiments because the researcher has more control over both the research conditions and the variable being tested. The first strength about laboratory experiments is that you have control over it because you constructed it. So you have control over it. The standardized research conditions give experiment a high level of reliability, and the research are always standardized. So it gives you more reliability. Experiments can also create powerful, highly valid statements about behavior based on cause and effect relationships. So because they are experiments, it means they are tested. So because they are being tested, it might give you a high validity based on the fact that these things are things that happens in real life. So we would know why an individual has behaved the way he has behaved. So we know the cause and the effect. So because we know the cause and effect, it should give us high validity. Field experiments can be used to manipulate situations in the real world to understand the underlying reasons for everyday behavior, like that of the teachers turning themselves to become psychologists. So it's a field experiment. So because it's a field experiment, they try to change situation or scenario, which allow them to get different information about day-to-day running of people, day-to-day behavior of people. But if it was a closed experiment like a laboratory experiment, they might not be able to change the situation as they did with the field research, because the field research is too big. So a lot of people will not even know each other, and research is ongoing. So that's the difference between a field experiment and a laboratory experiment. But either ways, they both gives us answers about correlation and causation. So what are the problems about field experiments and laboratory experiments? It can be difficult to control all possible influences on behavior, even in laboratory settings. A simple awareness of being studied, for example, may introduce an uncontrolled independent variable into the experiment. That's what we call the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect means behavior based on the presence of the interviewer has influenced the behavior of the respondent or the participants. We call it Hawthorne effect. So that Hawthorne effect, it means you understood that there is an external figure that do not belong to that group in that group. As a result, you change your attitude or behavior. That is what Hawthorne effect is about. You get it? Yes. Named after a study by Mayer in that Hawthorne factory in Chicago refers to change in people's behavior directly resulting from their knowledge of being studied. So the working conditions at the factory were manipulated in different ways, such as changing the brightness of the light and temperature in the factory. However, the results were always the same. The work rate of the workers increased because they knew they were being studied. So it's Hawthorne effect because you already know that you are being studied. So you trying to give results that would suit that researcher. So that's another problem about experiments. Is it clear? So how might the knowledge of being watched change behavior? So that's a point anyway. But the point here, they said, how might the knowledge of being watched change people's behavior? It changes people's behavior because you already know. So because you know someone is watching over you, your behavior will change to suit the kind of expectation from that person observing you. So it's about the expectation of the observer. So any individual will be able to, to change his or her attitude towards the expectation of that person looking up to him or studying him or her. I think it's clear. So we go to content analysis. For content analysis, it's simply talking about a method of researching communication method. It's a method that involves researching communication methods. Get the point here. We call it content analysis because it's a method itself. But this method allows us to search for ways in which we can communicate. That's why we call it content analysis. So I'm going to read anyway. Content analysis has both quantitative and qualitative forms. What both types have in common is the study of the text, like I just said. So it focuses on words, images, subjects, words, context, subjects that you can find out in notes or in pictures. So you find out these are picture. What are the information you could get from the picture? What are the notes you could get from the picture? So this is what content analysis talks is about. So it can focus on words, the subject, and the concept of images or text. That is what content analysis is. So that's what they said, data sources such as television, written documents, and so on. Quantitative analysis of media text, for example, uses statistical techniques to categorize and count the frequency of people's behavior using a content analysis table or grid. So here we have a table here. We have character, the gender, the age, the place and purpose on screen. So these are different people's identity, which can be based on their gender, their character, their age, and who they are. Do you understand? So these are what content analysis we talk about. These are contents. So you are able to come out with information based on the availability of, or you are able to come out with an information based on the pictures you see, the documents you see, or the images you see. So that is content analysis. So here it said simple content analysis grid to record the behavior of characteristics in television program. That's about that. So it's content analysis because it's simply talking about you focusing on words, subjects, through a picture, through an image, or through a text. That is content. So you are bringing out information for people to see based on the images you see. That is content analysis. I think it's clear. So what are the strengths of content analysis? Content analysis can identify underlying themes and patterns of behavior that may not be immediately apparent. For example, the extent to which women in television or magazines advertisements are associated with housework and cleaning. Because it's content analysis, it allows you to understand some behavior that if you alone wants to find out, you might not be able to get them. So the researcher has done its own research and he has come up with different information based on things he or she has seen in the videos, in images, in notes. So it reduces your own stress finding those answers. So the researcher has done that for you. That's what they said. It identifies underlying themes and patterns of behavior that may not be immediately apparent. You might not see them, but for the fact that a content has been made regarding it, then it becomes easier for you to see. Content analysis can also be used for concept mapping. Tracked how media professionals portrayed global warming in order to show how for global warming was reported in terms of natural or social causes. So another thing about content analysis is that it can explain to us why certain events happened. It's a content, they create a content, And when you create a content, you are passing a message across. So with content analysis, we can easily understand why things happen and why they give certain names a name. So that's what they are telling us here. They said content analysis can also be used for concept mapping. So mapping is about pointing out events, why they happen, what makes them to happen, what is the benefit of it happening, why did it even happen. So content analysis talks about this because we said content analysis focus on words, text, subjects, about an image or about a picture or a text. So global warming as an example, it's an image that we need to talk about. So content analysis allows us to talk about global warming in the context. Do you get it? And the use of standardized framework also means that the data can be checked and replicated. Because it's content analysis, it needs to be standardized. It needs quality. You can't just come up with things that are not real and you want people to believe it is real. So whatever content you create, it has to be based on the scenario or standards. So you don't just, if you are creating, like maybe let's say it's an educational content, then it has to be educational. If it's in social, it has to be social. So whatever content you are creating, it has to be standardized. So it means anytime we find out that it is you, it is all about education. So you continue on that trend. You won't change that trend. That is standardization. Do you understand content analysis here? So content analysis is standardized because it has to follow through the same trend. You don't change it. Then what are the problems about content analysis? One, in some types of content analysis, reliability may be limited because researchers must make subjective judgments about what they are counting. So one of the problems about content analysis is the subjective idea about the researcher. Researcher might, they might have interest on certain things. So their interest, they focus more on their interest and forget about others that might even affect their interest, but they will just ignore it because they have certain interest. And that makes it to be subjective, which is bias. Not only do they have to decide which categories will and will not be used, they may also have to judge which forms of behavior fit which categories. So, yes, about categories. What categories do we use? Which categories we don't use? And they have to judge. In as much as they have to judge different situations, it means they are subjective. Because whatever situation, whatever judgment you give, it will still be based on your interest. Do you get the point here? The point I'm making is that we make judgments.
Yeah.
We make judgments based on facts available to us. So if the facts available to us interest us, we won't check further. Even if it doesn't interest you, even if it's wrong, in as much as we have interest in it, we wouldn't query or question those information. They will just accept them as the way
If you have interest.
Yeah, like I gave you something to do. Then you give me the results. You gave me the feedback. The feedback you give to me are things that I really like. Then it means I might not further ask questions about how you got there.
Oh, okay.
So that means whatever judgment we give as judgment based on interest, and they are subjective.
Okay.
This raises question about whether all observed behaviors can be neatly categorized. Content analysis does not tell us very much about how or why audiences perceive, understand, accept, or ignore themes and patterns discovered by the research. So, because it's content analysis, it has a purpose. We won't go beyond the purpose. And because we cannot go beyond the purpose, it means we won't be able to understand why certain things has happened. It's a content. We don't go beyond this. So it's about global warming. We won't talk further about global warming. We won't talk beyond global warming. So what does that mean? It means we won't be able to ask why we only talk about global warming. What about other environmental situations, or what about other societal situations? We won't talk about it. So the content is global warming. It ends there. Every other aspect that surrounds global warming, we're not going to question it. And because we cannot question those things, it brings about biasness. So that's the problem about content analysis. Are they clear?
Yes.
What's it called? The benefit of content analysis is that it allows us to track down mapping, which means we can understand why certain events has happened. Based on the fact that they are content, it is standardized, which means the trend continues to be followed. But the problem about it is that one, it brings about bias based on the fact that we only judge things on our interest. And two, we cannot go beyond the context or we cannot go beyond the context of the content. So whatever the content is about, we don't go further than that. And that means it limits our research further. So limiting our research further means we cannot go more than what we already have. And that doesn't bring about reliability. So that ends the strengths and limitations of quantitative research.